I'm with Karen and Mark Calder from the UK. Now, what are you doing here in the land?
Well, we came out originally for my research. I'm doing a PhD at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. And my research focus is upon Palestinian Christians, and particularly how Palestinian Christians use the Bible, and how the kind of culture of using the Bible differs in Eastern Christianity from Western Christianity. So that's the original reason why we came out.
Are there many Palestinian Christians here in the land?
Well, there's fewer than there used to be, at least as a proportion. Many have left, particularly those who were wealthier. And of course, just the broader circumstances of occupation. A lot of people who have the money to leave will choose to leave. But there's also a lot of people who, despite being able to leave, as Christians, believe it's important that this was the land where Jesus was born, this is where he lived, this is where he died and rose again. Therefore, they believe it's important that it's not a museum, that it's not just about empty churches, but there's actually Palestinian Christians living here and doing business here and working here and dying here as well.
So it's important for the Christian community to know that there's actually a remnant here in the land.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people, particularly looking from the West and looking to the East and seeing Israel here, presume that this is a purely Jewish and Muslim land, and that any Christians here are either monks or tourists. But of course, Christians have been here for 2,000 years. They've had a witness here. They've engaged their Muslim neighbours and as friends and as brothers. And certainly since 1948, they've been very much part of the Palestinian experience. And experienced the same things that the Muslim population have experienced here. So I think for many Palestinian Christians, and you'd have to ask them, but my experience talking to them is that it's important to recognise that they've got a very ancient heritage living in the land here.
Now, Karen, you've came over here with your husband as well. What are you doing here?
Well, primarily, I guess my role should be that I'm a research assistant. Yeah. Mark's hoping to write a book at the end of all this, and I'm quite keen on photography, so I'm doing a little bit of photography in the hope that will contribute to Mark's book. But also, I've kind of taken on a few of my own things. There's a couple of projects that I've gotten involved in here.
And what are they?
The first one is House of Hope. That's a residential place for children with special needs, also for people who are blind, and they're making things in a workshop there. I've started to help out there working with the children, and also just taking on some practical projects. I've been redecorating and things like that.
How important is it to come here and work with some of those children that are disabled?
So important, and I'm finding very much that I'm learning from these children. And the other project that I'm involved with as well is also working with adults with intellectual disabilities, and I'm learning so much from them about just perspective on life and how to live with others and love others.
Do you find that children here in the land, that disabled children, are undervalued?
I think that is, definitely the case, but in these two places that I have come to know, has been very much turned on its head, and the value is huge. So
you would want to see the value in the whole of the whole of the community as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's good.
There's something to add to what Karen was saying about how disabled people are valued more generally, even in the West, where there might be a lot of resources and facilities and so on. But still, Karen drew attention to the fact that she learnt an awful lot from disabled people with intellectual disabilities. And even in the West, I think people with intellectual disabilities can easily be written off unfairly or prematurely. So it's been amazing to visit a couple of times where Karen's been helping out there and just see the kind of life that people with intellectual disabilities live with one another and with people without intellectual disabilities. And it's been really something quite inspirational, I think, for both.
It is a great work that people do there. It's very, very difficult. And I was visiting one of the children's homes just a few weeks ago, and they were talking about how the life expectancy of the children was very, very low. Yet because they were being cared for and loved, they're actually still alive, where they should have died many, many years ago. So it's really promoting life for the children. Of course, to know that as a worker must be so encouraging, to know that you're keeping them alive in that sense.
Yeah. And they keep other people alive as well. At Man Lil Hayat, it's a workplace for people with intellectual disabilities, but there's so much of a focus on just sharing and celebrating life together. It's so much more than just working together. If you happen to call in there on a day when it's someone's birthday, you'll just see the most elaborate
party
celebration. Absolutely, party time, and it's wonderful.
Good. Now, Mark, your research has been developed with the Syrian Orthodox Church. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I hadn't originally intended to research Syriac Orthodox when I first put together my research proposal and so on. But it was quite a natural fit, because I'm interested in very different ways in which Christians express their worship of God, and how they live as a community among other communities and so on. And in the West, I suppose you could say the Syriac Orthodox are the other end of the spectrum in one sense. There's a huge emphasis upon the kind of right use of Scripture within worship, within liturgy. It's a very kind of sensory practice. If you go to a Syriac Mass, you'll be struck by the beauty of the hymns, the ancient melodies, which sound almost like they come from a different world, let alone a different time. And so when I first visited the Syriac church, not only was the welcome very warm and the people very kind, but this sense of, okay, I'm entering into a practice of worship here that is very different from anything I've experienced as a Western Christian. There's an identity here that is different. There's a praxis here that is different, and there's something here that I'm sure I can learn from as an individual, and also that Western Christians, perhaps in general, can learn from.
Why did you actually come to Bethlehem and to the Palestinian Authority?
That's a good question. I mean, my interest in Palestine goes back many years. I was here during the Second Intifada in Nablus, and I was a volunteer there, really just with the university, trying to find out more about what it's like to live here. I'd studied a little bit of Arabic at the University of Edinburgh when I was an undergraduate, and so I was always keen to come out and experience Palestine. And of course, it was a very interesting time for me, and as soon as I left, I realised I wanted to come back at some point. In the meantime, since I was an undergraduate, I did some work within music, singing. I was a musical director in a show in a festival in Scotland, and I became very interested in how the kind of the life of worship and art and performance and music ties into kind of Christian life in general, and then began to think, well, you know, in Scripture you've got an awful lot of poetry that often cries of lament towards God, not just teachings, but things that are in very human voices calling upon God to intervene. And I thought, well, this kind of fits with a certain amount of Palestinian Christian experience. Maybe we could explore that. And so really that was the starting point, and here I am now doing fieldwork among Syriac Orthodox Christians.
Now, Karen, how do you feel about the Palestinian people? You've lived here for a while.
Yeah, I've been here since the end of March, I think. And I love it. I love the people. I just have been made to feel so at home here, so welcome. Someone asked me yesterday if I'm missing England and Scotland, and actually I thought, well, not so much, because I just feel very at home here, and the people are incredibly hospitable and welcoming.
Do you get invited into strangers' houses and things like that?
Actually, you've had a few invites to strangers' houses, but I've been invited to many houses, not from strangers yet. But yeah.
And Mark, how do you feel about the Palestinian people here?
Well, as I say, I mean, my interest in Palestine goes back a few years. So I think anywhere within Palestine, you're met with this hospitality and this warmth. And there's also a sense of resilience and persistence here. I think they call it sumud. In Arabic, this sense of, okay, everything looks very bleak for the future, the economic situation is dire, every political process seems to have ended in a in a dead end, and yet we somehow have to live normal lives, or try and live as normal lives as we can. We need to celebrate life. We need to celebrate each other. We need to enjoy each other's company, and that's something that I think is very characteristic of Palestinian culture as I've experienced it.
How do you feel about Bethlehem itself?
Bethlehem I love. Bethlehem is very different from Nablus, obviously. Bethlehem is far more a kind of global town. It's lots of tourists, lots of activists or visitors or aid workers, volunteers. So you kind of get the sense that Bethlehem is very unique. Kind of, it exists in its own kind of niche within Palestinian society, and that makes it different in some ways worse, because you sometimes feel like there's maybe not that same sense of unity or understanding always between different groups. Whereas in Nablus, you know, it's a very Palestinian town. It feels a long way from anywhere else. But having said that, the fact that in Bethlehem people are mixing more, there's a regular and kind of natural engagement with others from the outside, makes it very dynamic and very exciting place to live.
Now, we all know the Christmas Carol or Little Town of Bethlehem. Karen, is it like what you imagined?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I don't really know what I imagined, but what I have found is somewhere very peaceful. I do feel like this is a really peaceful place to live. I haven't experienced living anywhere else here, but when I've had visits in Jerusalem and it's all hustle and bustle and things are buzzing in Jerusalem, I actually love that sense that I get when I cross back into Bethlehem, just of peace, and things are quite chilled here. So I guess the peacefulness does fit with the Christmas Carol. I guess in the Christmas Carol you imagine things being so simple and idyllic, and I don't think that exists anywhere in the world.
Now, you're actually from the Lake District area, very close to the Lake District.
Yes.
And the Lake District is known for its weather of rain and rain and rain. And here it must be somewhere in the middle to high 30s. How do you cope with the weather when it's been so hot?
I stay indoors when I can. Heat is not the best weather for me, the best climate for me, because I am very fair-skinned and fair-haired, and so I burn very easily. So I'm a bit more, allergic to the sun than Mark is. Mark loves it. Yeah. But yes, I've developed a very good routine of covering myself in sun cream every morning.
And Mark, what sort of English food would you bring to the Palestinian people?
Well, I can best answer that by saying what I've brought into Palestine, and that's a jar of Marmite. Now, it is very difficult to describe Marmite in any way that sounds attractive, but let's just say once you've been bitten by the bug, it's something that you'll love for the rest of your life.
The Marmite is something you either love or you hate, isn't it?
Well, so the advertisements tell you.
So finally, what's your prayer for the Palestinian people here in the land?
I guess freedom, and by that I mean more than a kind of freedom from occupation or a political freedom. I mean, probably the freedom from fear. I think people who live in difficult circumstances and have lived with a lot of reasons to be hopeless can end up sometimes living constantly with a sense of fear or foreboding. But I would just pray that people can learn to love more and more and more, such that fear becomes less and less and less. And that actually gives Palestinian society as a whole, individuals, families, and the whole nation a kind of hope and a kind of purpose and a kind of direction. And I'm pleased to say that prayer has already been answered to some extent.
And Karen, for you?
I think my prayer has developed out of something I've already seen to be the case here on a very small scale. In one of the places where I help out, you see people with such differences and different religions, different abilities, different limitations, living together in such unity that I've never seen anything so beautiful. And I would just love to see that happening on a bigger scale.
That's great. Well, Mark and Karen, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having us.